What are your big takeaways today? Is it the avatar legs?
The avatar legs was a pretty easy one to point out and fun, obviously, a little bit better than just floating around in the metaverse. But no, I mean, the headset was sort of the flagship product that was announced today, this new kind of high-end VR device. It's as Mark said in that video, it's more tailored toward working professionals. They're kind of going after a higher-end clientele than I think they have with some of their other stuff. But, a lot of the technology that they kind of showed off toward the end of the presentation is the stuff, in my opinion, that's most interesting. This is, for example, like lifelike avatars, right? Or even, the ability to kind of use your hand or your wrist as a controller. All of that is very cool. The problem is it's just years and years away, right? So now you're asking people to be very patient. You're asking investors to be very patient as they build and work on this stuff. And so I think, that's where the issue comes in. It's not that the technology is not cool. It's just it's really far off.
David, the stock dropped almost 4%. Why do you think that is?
Well, one way to look at it would be this is a company with 3.5 billion people in a business that's generating like 40 billion a year in after-tax profit, that is talking about a business for which they've sold 15 million devices and a metaverse product that has 300,000 users a day, and that's what the management is putting its primary focus on, it would seem. If you're an investor in a company that has such misguided priorities, I think you would be very disappointed.
Is the workplace, David, ready for metaverse technology?
No, not at all. No, it is not. It is not. It's simply not. We don't want to meet in the metaverse. It's very nice that Zoom and Microsoft have talked to Meta about possibly making a 3D version of their meeting products, but that is not what most people want to do. The company's behaving as if it was a gaming company. I mean, everything today was talked about as if it was a company for gaming. The kind of technologies are gaming technologies. It's kind of a gaming psychology, gaming aesthetics. But that isn't really what this company is. And it's a scary, scary situation this company has put itself in my opinion.
Kurt, what's your response to that?
I think David's right. I mean, as I kind of alluded to there, right? The tech's cool, but can they convince investors that it's worth waiting 10 years for, right? And as David points out, like they have a business here that needs attention right now, which is the advertising business, right? I mean, they're kind of dealing with a real serious threat right here and now with TikTok and young people not necessarily wanting to use their apps. And so when you think about that's the current state of the business, and then you look at, what the priorities seem to be for Mark Zuckerberg, it doesn't necessarily align. And I imagine that there are a lot of people clearly, I guess, given the stock movement today, that saw this and thought, man, why are they spending so much time and money on this problem when they have others that they need to be addressing?
Now, we spoke to Frances Haugen last week, of course, the Facebook whistleblower, and she had an interesting thought about Sheryl Sandberg leaving the company and, the company now, of course, being fully in the hands of Mark Zuckerberg. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Mark has surrounded himself with people who tell him the same kinds of stories over and over again. Facebook is just a mirror. It doesn't have responsibility. All these things that we're complaining about have always been present. We're just showing them to people. We don't play any role in this. We have no power.
David, curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I completely agree with her analysis of how they see this. I mean, to the degree Zuckerberg thinks about the sort of sociocultural impact of the products that he's built, he's still basically in the mindset of making the world more open and connected is really cool. And he thinks the metaverse is the next stage of that. He doesn't want to take responsibility for the ongoing problems that he has not resolved. And I continue to think that the reason the company changed its name almost exactly a year ago, at the height of Frances Haugen's revelations about numerous misdeeds and errors and unresolved problems, was to change the narrative, which to their credit, was very successful as a PR move, but isn't really successful as a business move long term. And now they're stuck with a new name and an ostensible direction that isn't really rational. So they have such serious problems. And if any other company had these problems, the CEO would be out. But this is a company with no governance, with a board that is just a paper board because Zuckerberg completely controls it. He can't be fired. He controls all the shares. I mean, he controls a majority of the shares, so he can do whatever he wants. And that is a very dangerous situation. And it is dangerous for investors to be in this company, even though its PE is lower than any other major tech company by a substantial margin. It's not a good investment going forward.
Well, and that's in part because its market cap has dropped so much since Frances Haugen and since the company changed its name. This is now a $345 million company. David, how bad would things have to get before Mark Zuckerberg considers something as extreme as taking it private?
Well, you know that's something that I have thought about as a possible remedy for the problems the company has, because then it could address the serious challenges it faces without the stock market breathing down its neck and judging it, with the voting machine of the stock every single day. They have a lot of expensive problems to fix, and it would be a lot better to do it if they were private. But I think it would have to get a lot worse. I mean, look, the stock is down from almost $1 trillion to $350 billion now. It could go down to $250 billion, at which point I don't think it would be irrational for him to consider taking it private, since he completely controls it.
Kurt, we've talked and seen so much of their vision for virtual reality. What about augmented reality? How much farther does this go?
Yeah, well, we saw some glimpses of that in the headset, right? They're calling it mixed reality, but it's this idea that while you're wearing the headset, you can actually see the world around you. You can overlay graphics or digital objects on that world. And that's ultimately the vision that Zuckerberg has for AR glasses, right? That we might wear them. They'll look sort of like reading spectacles, but you'll wear those, and that's how you'll interact without more, not really a bulky headset. But, I think to David's point here, what's interesting is, like, Mark Zuckerberg would probably tell you, hey, listen, you're betting on me, right? I have made, for the most part, pretty good business decisions for almost 20 years. And that's why he has control, and that's why people, invest in this company. But over the last year or so, I think he's really raised some questions as to whether this is a pet project of his, or whether this is actually a good, use of funds and attention. And we won't know that for like 10 years. And so that's, I think, the big trouble here is it's hard to say whether or not he's right.